What kind of oversight is there for a lab like Spiez, which, from what I know, looking at the technology and science, which I understand a bit, would be capable of doing this? Why is there a new building that is being kept secret from everyone?
So it is possible that pathogens from war zones like Ukraine could make their way to Spiez. So we are dealing with the absolutely most dangerous possibilities pathogens here.
So now we suddenly notice that this is coming together. Yes, that on one side I produce classic weapons of war, and on the other side what I might put in there with appropriate control. So these are the things that naturally worry me. There are working hypotheses about this. I do not want to imply, and I say this very consciously, I do not know if this is happening in Spiez, but you would have the potential to do it.
Dear viewers, welcome to another discussion on my channel. Today I want to talk about a hot topic, namely the danger of a possible bioweapons lab in Switzerland. Joining me today is the pharmacologist, toxicologist and biologist Professor Dr.
Stefan Hockertz. Hello Stefan, I greet you.
Hello Flavio.
As well as the entrepreneur and president of the Swiss Association WIR, Christian Oesch. Hello, Christian.
Good evening, Flavio. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, thank you for taking the time today. And first, for our viewers, we are on a first name basis. We know each other. We met last year. Christian, we met at the AWF in Prague and then at an event of yours in Switzerland. And Stefan, we crossed paths during the Corona period in some interviews, and now we've met again in Switzerland. That's why we agreed to use DO, and today we want to talk about a really hot topic, namely a biolab in Switzerland in Spiez, located by the beautiful Lake Thun. You both live practically nearby the Federal Laboratory Spiez. It is not an ordinary research lab. Since the end of 2021, it has been functioning as an international hub for the exchange of SARS-CoV-2 samples within the framework of the so-called WHO BioHub system. The system is coordinated by the World Health Organization, the WHO. The goal is, at least officially, to improve global pandemic preparedness through rapid and standardized access to pathogens. Yes, Christian, you have been dealing with the activities of this lab for a while. Is there possibly a second Wuhan threatening there, and what is being researched there exactly? What are your findings, Christian?
Yes, thank you for this question. And yes, we have been aware of this laboratory for some time. That was really in 2021 when we were able to identify that the BSL-4, that is BSL-4 biosafety level 4 Laboratory Spiez, was contracted as a WHO BioHub system laboratory. So actually it is an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, and that is actually the dangerous part. In today's politics, we observe that quite a lot, and very, very much is now settled with an MOU and not actually with an official contract.
Do you like this interview and the content on my channel? Then you can easily support me by subscribing, sharing this conversation with all your friends and acquaintances, and leaving a comment for the algorithm.
And not actually with an official contract. So there are some things that we uncovered here, and especially last year. I was there with Dr. Meryl Nass, who is a highly trusted physician, a scientist, and she is, so to speak, a colleague of Robert F. Kennedy's right hand. And she looked at it together with me, and then she also wrote various Substack articles in coordination with our contributions here with the association WER. And then we delved deeper in an interview, and I noticed that a lot of information was accumulating because through our local research, it became clear to me what we had actually stumbled upon here, as we are really dealing with extreme constitutional concerns. And because we then put together a lab team, and Stefan is also part of it, to be able to cover the science. We also have parliamentarians from the National Council and the Council of States, and we have met several times and tried to find out some things with direct questions to the Federal Council. And you can probably imagine how much information we got there, right? Since no one opens their mouth, we also have certain answers. And I think that by putting pressure here, it is important that we can actually inform the public about it, because so much is happening quietly. And in the background, we see that a security relevant competence cluster is being assembled. So it's not just the Spiez laboratory, but also other laboratories that were developed here in Switzerland and are working together, so to speak. And then there's Rheinmetall, or two different Rheinmetall from the arms company Rheinmetall. These are properties, one of which in Spiez is really only 300 meters away from the front door of the Spiez laboratory. And when we look at the whole thing together, it becomes really interesting. So from my point of view, it's not that Switzerland is somehow out for aggression. Not at all. It's not a secret desire behind it, but rather a calculation as I perceive it. And the deeper we put our fingers into the wound, we see that it is simply technically indispensable, the laboratory here in Switzerland, because these organizations, especially now the WHO, enjoy this diplomatic immunity, so to speak. And then it becomes really very dangerous when we also follow the NATO development. Last year, NATO also received the keys from our Federal Council for an office in Geneva. They are because they really sit together in the same city. So this is precisely the competence clash I am addressing here. No one talks about it, and we know from earlier times, especially during the Second World War, how Switzerland was exploited, and I suspect that even our national government is being coerced and even blackmailed. That is my opinion. Stefan, maybe you could add something here. What is your feeling?
Yes, maybe first, let's briefly tell the viewers what kind of lab this is. So it is a high security lab. There are actually only 4 levels, BSL 1 to BSL 4. BSL stands for Biological Safety Laboratories. And this laboratory is level 4, so it has the highest level so far. Although it is currently being expanded, we can say more about that. So BSL 5 is in preparation, which is almost unimaginable. Maybe we should just remember to come back to that later. Such labs, well, I have worked in such labs myself, which is why the Spiez lab is known to me as a specialized lab with excellent safety measures and outstanding international staff long before I was here in Switzerland. So the laboratory has existed since the 1980s, and there have been no incidents so far. I also hardly think we need to worry, because you, Flavio, when you mentioned a lab like in Wuhan, no, it definitely is not. While Wuhan is literally an open door where I can carry everything in and out, that is definitely not the case in Spiez. The Spiez laboratory is structured under civil protection. We must simply say it is under the Federal Council and civil protection. You could say, okay, Switzerland can do something like that, right? I mean, although I still haven't understood, Christian, we both talked for a long time about how altered viruses, bacteria, other biological substances, that is bioweapons, can somehow be used for civil protection, right? I still haven't understood that. I didn't understand that in my previous work at the Fraunhofer Society, how these can be considered defensive weapons. No, they are offensive weapons. And when we talk about weapons, but first of all, it is biological research, which of course leads to not only getting to know these pathogens better, but also altering them. We call that gain of function or dual use research. And even though this is vehemently denied, it is most likely conducted under the leadership of the WHO, and now we come to the problem itself, probably also in Spiez. Why do I say under the leadership of the WHO? The laboratory, once again, about 150 employees, if I remember correctly, assembled internationally. We are also currently trying to clarify who actually works there, right? So which nationalities are involved. That is, of course, also of interest to us. First of all, it now has the task to characterize these different species to create a strain collection. Yes, now it gets interesting to hand them over to other laboratories. Well, we would call it community, production, and distribution of dangerous biological material. Although with distribution, I again wonder, where is it going, as Werner Oberländer would say. And that is indeed a very crucial question. Where is it going and what postmark is actually on it? And now it gets exciting. It is no longer the postmark of the Federal Council and the attached civil protection construction, but it is the postmark of the WHO. And it is quite obvious too, and our dear friend Peter Eberhard, who wrote a book that I believe is also published by you, about the horror lab in Spiez, has researched this very, very well and was able to show what Christian just said. Companies like Rheinmetall. I always wonder, what are they doing in Switzerland? Parenthesis open, parenthesis close. But also Pfizer and other big pharmaceutical companies that come and go there. What do they have to say there? And I think that's the crucial question. Maybe from my perspective, I have nothing against such a lab. Every state must know what it is dealing with. But if it no longer operates under its own aegis, under its own power structure, but under a structure like the WHO, then I am against it. Because the WHO is, to me, I say quite openly, led by a criminal. Tedros is a mass murderer. We all know that. And of course, I have the greatest concerns if he gets such an instrument in his hands.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and now there are already initial reactions to this research from your side. Kurt Münger, he is the head of management tasks at the laboratory in Spiez. He directly addressed what was alleged there, and he said, I quote him here from a publicly accessible interview, he said, "No, the Spiez laboratory does not conduct gain of function research, and we have no intention of conducting so-called GOF, that is gain of function research in the future." Christian, can the gentleman be trusted or not? How should such statements be assessed, and how transparent is this laboratory actually on such matters?
Yes, well, from the public office, one would certainly expect such a response. Yes, that something like that would come. And they would certainly not comment. So when we talk about the biolab, I don't want to imply anything, especially not about the employees, perhaps not even about the management here. The situation, as we currently understand it, is that pressure is arising, as Stefan just mentioned, through the PABSS, that is the pathogen access benefit sharing, which by the WHO, the The Spiez laboratory was imposed with very, very clear obligations for this laboratory. And the interesting thing is we also see with our research the possibility that this is actually about third-party funding. So that means it is not only funded by the Swiss government through the Federal Department of Defense, Civil Protection and Sport, but it also provides the opportunity for third-party funds to be used in this lab and for contracts from third parties to be facilitated there. That is really very opaque, and then we will certainly not get any information to the public. The interesting thing is what we have followed is that the Convergys Convention is mentioned in the annual report 2024, chapter 13. And those who might be following this topic, I would like to perhaps encourage them to go read this chapter 13, because there they talk very specifically about the direction of the research that is applied not only worldwide, but especially in the Spiez laboratory. And that has a lot to do with this protein folding, that is with amino acids, protein folding. And that is the focus. And Stefan Hockertz is certainly very competent here, perhaps to add some things. But that we get the truth from a public authority, I don't think so at all. And that's also what we actually are doing, have done here. We have written to the Federal Council now twice here in the last two weeks. We also included Donald Trump and Robert Kennedy in our letter so that we can address these actions that took place in the USA last year on the 5th of May, where they published by the White House a fact sheet that specifically addressed gain of function, dual use gain of function, so that they could implement these control mechanisms, also the financing bans, and these various strategies can be pursued much better to also provide protection for public health. So the interesting thing happening here is that the USA is leaving the WHO, the World Health Organization. This also means that nearly 1 billion in funds will be withdrawn, and it's interesting to see who will fill this gap now. And at the same time, we see that America, the government, the current administration is trying to control and prohibit these gain of function activities and also stop funding, while Switzerland is acting against that. So the Swiss government, without a referendum, without a fundamental decision, without parliamentary debate, is simply acting here. And that is exactly what we are trying to do with massive pressure, so that they simply have to answer our questions. And maybe, Stefan, could you add something here that I might not have mentioned yet?
Yes, I would like to say Mr. Munger is certainly an honorable man, no question about it. And he gives the answers he has to give. And but there are many arguments against it. I compare it to when I read it, Flavio, I was fatally reminded. I am of German origin, and I am very involved with history. I always had a lot of fun with it, even though I never studied it. And it occurs to me it was the 15th of June, 1961. So I was just barely a year old. You can all calculate how old I am. So on the 15th of June, 1961, Walter Ulbricht, then chairman of the State Council of the GDR, coined the following phrase: "No one has the intention to build a wall." So for me, it was eerily similar to what Mr. Munger said. Just under a month later, the Berlin Wall, as we all know, was built on the 13th of August. Those are the answers that that I expect, yes, from officials alone. Back then, with the Berlin Wall, we couldn't quite understand it because the workers of the GDR were quickly, so to speak, mobilized. With gain of function, it looks a bit different. I then ask, now here through our program, Mr. Müller, Mr. Munger, why is he not able to openly give parliamentarians insight into the work of this, yes, officially Swiss state-run laboratory? Why do they have to stay out or are only shown around in some corridors where you actually see nothing? Why don't we, as people with a relevant background, I have worked in similar roles at the Fraunhofer Society, why don't we get insight into the activities? And then I can quickly tell you what's being done there. And of course, there is good molecular biology. And what is gain of function? I mean, for many of our listeners, that might not be entirely clear yet, right? Gain of function means an enhancement of properties, for example, of a virus. And I can enhance these properties by incorporating inserts, that is, molecular biological genetic inserts, into this virus. These are departments of molecular biology or genetics that deal with this, and of course they exist there. In Spiez, there are also good people, respect for their work, no question. But then we should also be honest about it and say that it is being done there, because denying it, nobody intends to build a wall. Denying it makes sense because Trump banned gain of function research on the 5th of May 25. Many are not aware of this. It could be read at the White House. He not only banned gain of function research in the United States, but he also said that any financial support for this enhancing, infection enhancing research on pathogens will be prohibited or banned. One may then naturally ask the question, what kind of control is actually in place for a lab like Spiez, which, to my knowledge, when I look at the technology and the science, of which I understand a bit, would be capable of doing this? Why is there a new building that is being kept secret from everyone for this construction site at this new building? Christian, we looked into it, or rather tried to research it. There isn't even an official developer in Switzerland. That's unheard of, right? So someone must be paying the workers and the concrete. A construction that goes 5 floors deep in a former gravel pit. Why is something like that being built if we're just doing simple maintenance? So, excuse me, I believe Mr. Munger just as little as I did Walter Ulbricht back then.
Mm-hmm. And I came across an interesting article from SRF, the Swiss Radio and Television, while researching this topic. He dedicated an article to the 100th anniversary of this laboratory. The laboratory was already established in the year 1925. And at the very end, there is a correction note. And it is written there, I will read it out. In an initial version of the article, it was stated that the Spiez laboratory produces chemical warfare agents. The Spiez laboratory does not produce chemical and biological weapons. This passage was corrected, found right at the end of the article. And Christian, now my question to you, perhaps seeming a bit naively blue-eyed, what would happen in a possible disaster scenario? Who would have the authority to give instructions? Who is liable in an emergency, and who actually controls an organization that, as you rightly pointed out, can claim immunity?
That is a fantastic question here. And I can tell you at the moment it stands that actually no one can take responsibility. This is the dangerous part here. Now you have the biolab, which is actually under military control, meaning the Swiss government here. And they are now under contract with the MOU between the DDPS and the WHO, okay? And whatever else might be going on there. And that's very interesting, at least for me and how we looked at it. Through the PRPS system, they are responsible for storing all pathogens worldwide there and then also distributing them depending on what is required. So it is possible that pathogens from war zones like Ukraine are making their way to Spiez. So we are dealing with the absolutely most dangerous possibilities of pathogens here. And we know that And this is perhaps something I can mention here, and I'll come back to it in a moment, through Dr. Merrill Ness in the United States. She also shared her information with me, and one thing is she prepared for an international convention and sent me a slide, and that is very, very interesting. Stefan also indicated that the Spiez laboratory is very secure, and we all hope that compared to Wuhan. But of course, we have a report here in the USA from this goes back to 2023 from the CDC, okay? And that shows that back in 2023, they lost 28 agents, meaning pathogens. Of those, 215 were released. Just imagine that. 764 people were exposed in the United States. The FBI was notified, that is informed, and 16 different security issues were also reported there, and 7 of them were then prosecuted. So when we look at the USA with their security measures and transparency that they have there, so the USA already, the United States has a control center, the CDC, that actually monitors this. In Switzerland, this does not exist. So if something were to happen here in Switzerland, I don't know of anyone who actually has to, follow up on it and bear the responsibility. Basically, it's just like now, where everyone can simply pass the blame to each other. No one. And especially the parliament. So the Council of States and the National Council cannot have a say because they are not informed. But I have indicated we have members of the Federal Assembly, that is the National Council and the Council of States, and they are not informed. And when they ask questions, we have asked questions to the Federal Council, exactly this question: who is responsible? What are the safety precautions? Not a sound, nothing, not a word comes back.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can compare it a bit with the emergence of corona. I mean, we have a blueprint. Today we know relatively precisely that this virus, a relatively harmless virus, was a trial run, that it originated from Chapel Hill, University of South Carolina. We can now, I believe, say this with good reason. The whole thing has even been patented. I mean, Americans always tend to make money. So in that sense, and we have to keep that in mind, it has been patented, exactly this virus, with the same inserts as it later appeared. And I can only patent things, maybe you don't know this, I can only patent things that do not occur in nature. So a classic virus that occurs in nature cannot be patented. Nature cannot be patented, only an invention or a modification of it. What we also did, and I'm quite interested in searching through, is which patents does the Spiez laboratory actually hold? There's a lot to be found there. It's quite exciting. So, and if I now say again, I cannot patent beings, viruses, bacteria, nothing that occurs naturally, then they must have been altered. Then I can file a patent on that. Ralph Steven Bardich, he did that in Chapel Hill, then patented this SARS-CoV-2, he really called it that, yes, virus, then in 2019, a year after his retirement, sold it to Fauci. And now comes the important point, and that's why, Christian, we really live absolutely safely here, even though we have it in the neighborhood. Because we have it in the neighborhood. We live so safely here, because no one would have thought of releasing it in Chapel Hill, for heaven's sake. No, then I choose labs that have a very poor technical standard.
I remember I once researched this Wuhan. I was there myself once. Wuhan has such a poor technical standard when it comes to safety.
That was even reported in 2013 by American senators to the House of Representatives back then, or the Senate back then, because they said the CIA is involved. People, be careful what's going on. That's an open book in German terms. Everything just gets out.
There are no safety precautions. Therefore, I am sure that the technology here in Spiez is excellent, and no one needs to worry that something might be transported outside, like the Marburg virus, through the wash bucket. I am sure of that. No, what I am concerned about is who is in charge in a lab with this potential, with these possibilities. Who decides what is done there? And there is an old saying, Flavio, whose bread I eat, his song I sing, period. So this applies to biological research just as much as to the master craftsman who builds a house. And the house looks like how the homeowner who pays for it later wants it. It's that simple. So, and that's what worries me.
I can add to that, follow the money trail, a very simple ancient principle. And Stefan, I can directly ask you, because you mentioned earlier that a BSL-5 is currently being planned also in Spiez, and that there is significant funding involved in the background. So can you maybe elaborate on that? What is it about, and what are your findings from your research?
So we haven't talked about this in public yet, right? I think we're having a premiere here, Christian. I'll dare.
This is very hot, straight from the silver platter.
That's it. The lab will handle it. I trust them to do it. They have the competence for it. If we look at the BSL-4 classification, those are the pathogens that seem the worst to us. Ebola, Nipah, we might keep that in the back of our minds. That's a candidate I see there, but also VV, meaning all these equine encephalitis viruses, this whole list of bioweapons. By the way, corona is not part of it. Yes, it's somehow 3 or 2. So BSL-4, absolutely deadly viruses, where we would actually say they don't exist anymore, right? I can't really top that. And I'm telling you, we can top it. There are researches or also works on coupling these pathogens with nanobots. That means with electronics, with electronic control systems, as I would call it, with electronic control systems that can switch certain areas, infectious areas in this virus on and off. That's not new. I've already worked on it myself, that we can incorporate molecular switches. These are real switches, molecular switches into this area that can be turned on and off from the outside, so to speak. And that now has a very special quality. So I'll make a working hypothesis. I could, for example, release a quite dangerous virus exclusively on people with a certain skin color or with a certain molecular background, be it a disease or a certain age or a certain hormonal status, and activate it through this molecular switch, that is, through these nanobots. Whenever it suits me. This, Flavio, is a completely new quality, more than an intervention in nature. And that's why we call it BSL-5, because it essentially turns an already sometimes almost 100% deadly virus into a controllable weapon. So why am I telling you this? I got involved with biological weapons and chemical weapons very early on, and the two classes of biological weapons and chemical weapons differ in distinct points. While a chemical weapon is difficult to produce, that's real chemistry. I have to master it. It's not easy. However, it can be deployed very easily. I stick it under the airplane and fly around, and I have a region, Agent Orange, best example, that I simply contaminate and where people die. With the bioweapon, it's exactly the opposite. The production of a bioweapon is quite simple. I always say, I've recently told Michael Neal's pot kitchen faucet. That's really all I need. And a bit of expertise. The production of the bioweapon is simple. The problem is the deployment. The targeted deployment of a bioweapon brings real problems with it, because a weapon always aims to kill specifically. No, well, sure, right. Weapon, classic pistol shot, the projectile goes to my opponent or the one I have to and want to shoot, and he gets shot. If the weapon now, so to speak, finds its own way, then I could hit myself, right? That would be a real problem. That means I need a target direction. That is always the definition of a weapon, and that was not possible with bioweapons until now. Yes, to say this again to the Federal Council and the German federal government, who obviously believed this in 2021, at 1 meter 50 when sitting, the bioweapon is just as dangerous as at 1 meter 80 when standing and going to the bathroom. You know, you had to wear masks. And even after 8 p.m., when there were curfews, they are there, and borders do not stop these bioweapons either. That's why we need a control element.
And these nanobots would be, so to speak, the ideal is a bit of an evil word, the satanic control element, and that's why we call it BSL-5. Now, as Christian already mentioned, I would like to briefly note just the spatial proximity in Spiez. There is another place called Wimmis, W-I-M-M-I-S. In Wimmis, there is a nice company called Nitrochemie. One doesn't really think much of it. Nitrochemie is a company of Rheinmetall, and propellants are manufactured there. Yes.
So now we suddenly notice that this is coming together. Yes, that on one side I produce classic weapons of war, and on the other side what I might potentially put in there with corresponding control. So these are the things that naturally worry me. There are working hypotheses about this.
I do not want to imply, I say this very consciously, I do not know if this is happening in Spiez, but they would have the potential to do it.
This new construction makes me very concerned, which has been built underground, 5 floors deep, all documented in the book by Peter Eberhard, who has researched it very thoroughly. And well, maybe we should display the book. Well, he has researched it very, very well, and can show what is being developed there. That really makes me very concerned.
Yes, and the question that naturally follows for me as an observer when I listen to you now, Stefan, is that it really sounds dystopian and also satanic. You put it quite aptly. But the question is, of course, on the one hand, why Switzerland specifically? A state to which one still attributes a certain seriousness and professionalism and also neutrality. So why specifically Switzerland in the heart of Europe? Perhaps the geographical aspect is also a factor regarding the spread. That is my opinion. And on the other hand, it raises the question of whether the population will endure it again. Corona 2.0, the population, the people have become quite critical in my view. So on the one hand, Christian, you as a Swiss, why Switzerland in particular? And do you believe that a scenario like the one Stefan just described is actually realistic? Or will it remain at best a working hypothesis? How do you assess that?
Yes, so we have confirmed that a new building is planned. I understand what the budget is, and we are still in the process of finding out some details exactly. We are also trying to understand how a laboratory in Spiez, with these incredible assignments from the WHO, with the entire PUB system, can afford to into a new building. So while they are actively implementing these orders internationally, worldwide, at the same time also going into a renovation, new construction, what exactly is happening there? And these are precisely the questions that no one has answered so far. And that's one thing. And the other is back to the neutrality of Switzerland. It is precisely that which makes Switzerland very attractive, the neutrality. But it is now really being heavily infiltrated. We have been able to observe this in the last few years, this rapprochement with NATO. NATO now also has an office in Geneva, so they can now quietly, without being disturbed, plot their warmongering, their plans. And we are following all of this. So from that perspective, it is actually an incredibly strong, shall I say, the country itself. So you have these NGOs worldwide, this communication, everything can be handled internally in Switzerland. You have the UN, the WHO is subordinate to the UN, the WHO. You have Gavi here. You have the Bank of International Settlement. That is the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. You have all these various very, very important NGOs. So it is quite certain that yes, the knot is made here in Switzerland, and through this structure, as I have hinted, the competence cluster makes it actually perfect for them to carry it out from here. And what I want to address here is we need to be aware of who funds the WHO, the World Health Organization. And there, as the USA has withdrawn, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the largest donor, followed closely by Gavi. And there, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is again the main sponsor. So if we follow the money, we really get to what the question should be. So no one asks the question, okay, if systems are built in such a way that they also profit or make profit in crisis. And we understand that the WHO, I believe in 21, founded its own foundation with which they can ensure investment, so to speak, up to and including 35. Yes. So I think 35. So an incredible return on investment. So if these donors can also invest in what the decision makers of the World Health Organization are, then it really gets intense. So if the same actors who designed the financial vehicles who must finance the simulations hold patents, as Stefan hinted, develop reinsurance triggers, and then also place personnel, I say now with the Spiez laboratory, it's perfect. Okay. And we do not yet have a roster, so to speak, of who exactly works there, where they come from, and yes, how they shape the policy and then steer the narrative. So if we trigger another pandemic, okay, and then everything is, of course, much more interconnected, strategized, and also tactically implementable, then it will become very dangerous. Stefan?
Well, I wouldn't even ask the question, if I may interject, why Switzerland, but rather if Switzerland, then where? I think the question would be, I don't want to correct you, Flavio, but I think the question would be more appropriate, and I can give you a few alternatives. Then you'll immediately say, oh dear, no, let's leave that. So I know about this because I used to be involved with it myself. We had about 14 laboratories of this kind, not nearly in the same class, but in the type of work in Ukraine. As far as I am informed, not a single one of them remains. Those were the first attacks that took place there. They specifically targeted these laboratories, for example, in Lviv near the Polish border, where otherwise nothing else really happened. These laboratories were destroyed. Then we have one in Georgia, not a really stable situation with the insurgents there. Also not really good access for the Americans anymore because it's quite Russia knows. Georgia is an excellent laboratory. There, it's just not quite accessible anymore. So sorry, Germany, sorry. Well, we tried in Ramstein, a clinic is now being built. I don't know if you know this, which works in this direction, but it is more of a supplier, yes, where people from all over the world are gathered. By the way, the Inselspital in Bern can do that just as well. By the way, it is also involved, just to mention in passing, to work as a supplier for infectious agents. So, and the whole rest is already becoming difficult. Yes, if not Switzerland, then where? Those are the advantages of Switzerland. I have eccentric staff. I have an excellent sense of security. The police, the surveillance in Switzerland is excellent. We don't notice it much, but it is excellent. We have a relatively independent military, a very important point. And very, very important. In Switzerland, not much is talked about. The Swiss are, first of all, discreet, and I think that's not a bad thing. I learned that recently. I just have to get this off my chest. What is the Swiss person's favorite body parts? the wallet. This means you can do a lot with money here, of course. That's well known. It's not a bad thing. Yes, I am a guest in this country. That's why I always have to be careful about what I say. But that's just how it is. Money here in Switzerland, I believe, is not a bad thing, plays the absolute main role.
And therefore, if I, as WHO, why is the WHO headquartered in Geneva and not in Paris or Berlin? Why does Gavi not have its headquarters in Paris or in Belgrade or elsewhere, but in Geneva? There is a reason for that, because they are left in peace here. And that's why we also leave the Spiez laboratory in peace. And I think the worst thing that can happen to them is strangers.
And now Christian starts and asks questions. For example, quite simply, who actually works there? What kind of contracts are those? Are they temporary contracts or longer contracts? What nationality do the employees actually have?
Very simple questions, where we just want to get an idea, since we are not allowed in. And I just say, whoever has nothing to hide. So if the Spiez laboratory is indeed only working cleanly, cataloging viruses and sending them with the Federal Council's approval. Yes? And only there, to other labs where maybe other things can be done, and not to Libya or the USA or, don't ask me, China, then that's fine. We need the control. And if I have nothing to hide, then I can also let people in there. Then I can let the members of the Council of States and the National Council fulfill their supervisory duties there. They are not allowed to do that. It is a black box. And whenever I construct a black box, then I have to accept that as the head of this black box and say, we do not intend to do gain-of-function research, then I also say I do not intend to build a wall.
Yeah, as it's, we know how the story with the wall ended, how this story with the laboratory in Spiez will end. That is written on a different page. It is, and this should now be clear to all our viewers, a really hot topic that you are dealing with. And that's why it's really important that we create critical awareness and public attention through such a format. Therefore, at this point, to all viewers, if you are watching this video right now, feel free to share it with all your friends and acquaintances so that everyone can learn what might be planned in Spiez. And you have now also reached out to the public. You have written an open letter to US President Donald Trump and to Robert Kennedy, the Minister of Health. Robert Kennedy, who also made headlines here in Germany after he sent a letter to the health minister. What was her name again? Help me in German. Nina Wagen, sorry. Yes, Nina Wagen.
Stefan, very well noticed.
Yes, I can never remember the name of the predecessor. Lauderzwerg? I don't even know anymore. But anyway, the lady's name is Nina Wagen. Exactly. There we have it again from this other person.
I was once told, better a quiet lake than a loud brook. Right. So you wrote an open letter to Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Trump. Firstly, what is the content of this open letter, and how do you hope to create public awareness for this, yes, truly important topic? Christian, maybe you or Stefan, who would like to?
Yes, very briefly. So I am trying through this. The colleague, Dr. Meryl Ness, has been a close colleague of Robert F. Kennedy for several years, and she also conducts various research for him, even while he is now leading the health department. And she picked up the whole anthrax theater back in 2021, so to speak. So she specializes in bioweapons development and thus has her finger on the pulse here with the World Health Organization Lab 4, like the Spiez laboratory. So through this connection, we took the opportunity to bring these letters to the administration through her. Also Trump, Kennedy, but also Jiba Tajari, and then Stefan definitely as well, because Robert Malone, so they have all been contacted with our content due to our constitutional concerns with the WHO BioHub BSL before Laboratory Spiez here in Switzerland and this development in the USA, that they actually want to take action against this gain of function research. And Stefan might have already hinted at this, but once again, and it's important that we address this again, a bioweapon is never for defense. It is always intended for attack. And everyone who listens to this should really let it sink in truly. And that's what we are aiming for. Okay, what exactly is happening here in Switzerland? How is Switzerland positioning itself? And at the moment, the way Switzerland has aligned itself with the WHO is actually 100% against what the current US administration actually has in mind. Stefan, you can certainly add a bit more here, especially from the scientific perspective.
Yes, on the one hand, there are questions that we have already partially formulated in this program. And of course, I must clearly say, the presumption of innocence always applies. The presumption of innocence also applies to the Spiez laboratory. That is why we are asking the questions. Yes, we are asking the questions in a fair process to obtain answers that are, of course, verifiable. So this, we don't do it, is of course far from sufficient. On the other hand, we naturally decided through the templates ultimately as well. I said the condemnation on the 5th of May 2025 by Trump of gain of function research, which intervention, the unexpected intervention by Kennedy with this woman Walker. Yes, he did not write to France. He did not even write to Switzerland. No, he wrote to Germany. Very, very interesting. Made us say, okay, then we will establish internationality now, not just on these issues. I admit it quite openly. I also connected it with my own situation. Kennedy says that doctors and scientists who spoke critically during the corona period are being persecuted. My answer to Robert was, I have met him personally. Robert, if you need an example, call me. We can talk about that sometime. I can tell you a bit about the whole topic. That was just a side aspect. Creating international attention, I consider in many cases also in Switzerland, but especially in Germany, to be extremely important. So that these questions, when we ask them, yes, little Stefan and little Christian, they might be brushed off. If they are asked from another side, the attention is a bit higher, and I see my role as a servant of Switzerland, even though I am not yet, unfortunately, but it could still happen, a Swiss citizen. I live here to advocate for this and to ask this question. To keep saying that the presumption of innocence applies means, first of all, it may be that only stockpiling is being done, but there is much to suggest that this is not the case, and therefore we need support from abroad.
To conclude, perhaps one more serious question from me. Do you actually think it's possible that a Corona 2.0, such a pandemic, could happen again? Is that within the realm of possibility, or do you say that by now we have such a critical awareness? I also experienced this in my close circle from most people who say they wouldn't go through that again. How do you assess that? Is the whole thing possible or rather unlikely?
Yes, I'll perhaps go ahead here, Stefan. So we are now closely following what is happening in Switzerland with the Epidemics Act. That means, therefore, it will not be the Federal Council imposing it. It is now being distributed among the cantons so that each canton can decide how to implement the epidemic law here. We have the first cantons that have disclosed in the next round, so to speak, as you mentioned, the next pandemic. If this leads to a vaccination, then it's really quite extreme. The canton of St. Gallen is talking about fines up to 20,000 francs. If you refuse a vaccination or injection,
a fine, substitute payment. You don't have to get vaccinated if you pay 20,000 francs. Christian, that's exactly the perverse point. With a penalty, I would also say, do you have to pay a penalty? No, you can buy your way out. The rich don't get the needle in the arm, and the poor have to take it.
You got that quite well. Yes, that's really extreme. And then Zurich talks about it, and Valais, I think, too. It is an incredible real act of blackmail and coercion. They are really putting everything in motion now so that every man, and of course, this is now being addressed. People are writing consultations. It's in the media, but the major mainstream media haven't really picked it up in a big way yet. But on the freedom movement side, things are really happening and there's already something going on. Well, I do think that from a business model perspective, it is certainly the plan that they will try it again. And I think this time was incredibly used to evaluate everything. So they have definitely used this time to develop better strategies and then implement everything even faster in every aspect. And I can already see, we already have in the canton of Lucerne, there is a mask mandate again in hospitals, not only for the staff, but even for the patients.
So I just want to briefly mention, I already have a suspect, and I will say it quite deliberately now so that people can prepare themselves. And I say it quite deliberately, quite loudly, what we are thinking of. There are many, many indications that there is a virus that is currently, shall I say, being prepared. Corona was, Christian, we agree on that. We have already said that in thousands of lectures. That was a trial balloon. That was a game. That was a consideration. How can we spread fear and terror, but with a relatively harmless virus? The RKI itself said, Corona cannot be compared to influenza. Influenza is more dangerous. Lasagne and
That supported my presentation back then.
So who do we have on offer? We have a very interesting virus on offer. Again, an RNA virus, by the way, very important. Not DNA, but RNA virus. I will get to that in a moment. That is currently subtly present in India, Thailand, Bali, and can hardly be transmitted from person to person.
Yes, when you talk to the Robert Koch Institute, they say, just like back in January 2020. No, don't worry, it's not that bad. The thing is called Nipah. I'll spell it out. November, India, Papa, Alpha, Hotel, Nipah virus. Since, what can that trigger? Correct. Respiratory diseases. What a surprise.
But frequently followed by meningitis. It can end fatally.
When we already see reports today that in India it is being said that the Nipah virus can be up to 90% deadly, which is complete nonsense, then we already see the same development. Again, it comes from afar. This time it is India and not China.
And we also see, I just did such an evaluation with John Lawson. He is really great. The guy is really super. So he can take a look at which countries are stirring up, which panic again. And it is exactly the same countries as in January 2020 that essentially drove these panic actions with Corona back then. Today we know those were orchestrated fear actions that are now focusing on Nipah again, with one single exception. Interestingly, Russia is no longer participating. I find that very interesting. Otherwise, we have only the same ones. And what leads me to tell you this is that this Nipah virus, which is currently leading an unnoticed existence in India. I did a bit of research. That's actually my main activity. And I found out there is an organization that made a very nice publication. I have to quickly, so I don't say anything wrong, briefly, it will be very, very quick, introduce it to you. And that is the so-called EBSCO. You should look it up there. EBSCO Knowledge Advantage. And there is the headline, Nipah virus as a biological weapon. So, and then I woke up and said, oh, what do we have here? What's coming our way? And yes, it was published in 2024. By Bernstein, a scientist from the USA who condescended to write something on this topic. And then I just say, people, just keep your ears open. Just use your brain just like it wasn't done with Corona, but think for yourself and don't be misled. Yes, they will come up with something new again, Flavio, and raise the danger potential significantly higher. They will raise it significantly higher, no worries. And when we read about Nipah today, we read
no treatment possible, and no vaccine available? And I would like to make a bet that then within 1 or 2 months, because that went wrong with Corona, Flavio, the vaccine, this gene therapy came much too late. They are now faster and offer it promptly, and I'll say it quite bluntly. Yes, I might make some enemies now, but I can handle that. I have a thick skin. Or those who tell me today, no, I'll never do that again. I did get injected 3 times, but that's it, man. Yes, I think they are the first to roll up their sleeves. Not to work, but to say, that's where it goes in. Anyone who has been blackmailed once is susceptible to blackmail. That's why I'm not as optimistic as you are, thinking, well, no, they wouldn't come up with such an idea again. Yes, they will carry it out 1-to-1 again. And what can already be observed is the lack of imagination of these officials. They are somehow officials again, that they carry it out 1-to-1, just like with Corona. Now, I'll say something. Today is the 9th of February, when we are recording this interview. I would guess we will have the first case in Germany in the Munich area, and it will probably even be the same hospital where the whole thing with Corona occurred. That's their lack of imagination, always using the same patterns.
And all of this, of all places, in the Munich area, my new home. In the meantime, I also did some research on the Nipah virus, which I wasn't aware of, but indeed numerous German media have already reported on it. Here too, the Münchner Merkur writes that the Nipah virus, with a mortality rate between 40 and 75%, is among the most dangerous pathogens worldwide. Apparently, there have already been 2 cases that resulted in a fatal outcome in India. So possibly something new is coming our way, but we remain vigilant. We won't let it happen to us again. That's what I mean. Yes, do it. I think that's very important. Also, once again, here's the message to you, dear viewers. Share this conversation, share this interview to create critical awareness. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have really covered the most important topics in depth today. And yes, I would like to sincerely thank both of you for taking the time on this late Monday evening. I think it was very important that we shed light on this topic. I wish you all the best. Stay well, stay vigilant, and I look forward to crossing paths with you again soon.
Gladly, thank you.
Thank you, Flavio. We are the red line up to here and no further.
That's exactly how it is. We are the red line, and obviously so are you, dear viewers. Thank you very much for joining us today for this interview with Professor Dr. Stefan Hockertz and Christian Oesch about a possible biolab in Switzerland. And yes, now I also wish you all the best. Stay well, and until the next conversation here on my channel.